Hi, in this tutorial I will give an overview of how you can use and program and communicate with Modbus using the MATLAB programming environment. So here you see the contents of this tutorial. First, a short introduction to Modbus, the Modbus protocol and how it works. Then I will introduce a software I have created called Modbus Demo Software. This is consisting of a Modbus server and a Modbus client. I will use this software in order to test the MATLAB code I'm creating later. Then I will introduce how you can use Modbus with MATLAB and use the Industrial Communication Toolbox. This is a new toolbox in MATLAB that supports Modbus, OpenC, MQTT, etc. Then I will show how you can use the built-in Modbus Explorer, which is part of the Industrial Communication Toolbox. Then I will show some MATLAB examples using the different registers in Modbus, namely coils, discrete inputs, input registers, and holding registers. So let's start with Modbus and the Modbus protocol. So Modbus is a serial communication protocol. It's a quite old protocol. It's go back to 1979. It was typically then used together with PLCs. It's still a much used protocol, and it's very popular in the industry today because it's simple to use and it is robust. And typically it's very popular in the industry in combination with PLCs, SCADA systems, distributed control systems, different types of process equipment like valves, PID controllers, etc. that all typically support the Modbus protocol. Here you see a typical Modbus scenario where you have different types of Modbus servers and then you have different types of Modbus clients. So the data are then sent between the Modbus servers and the Modbus clients. So the Modbus clients can both read data from the server and write data to the server. And the server is typically a PLC, a PC, or a distributed control system, or it could be some kind of process equipment like sensors, actuators, etc. So basically, the Modbus is a client-server architecture. So then you have the server that are storing the data into so-called registers, and then you have one or more clients that can either write data to the server or read data from the server. Originally the term master and slave was used, but now master and slave has been replaced with a more common term, client and server. So the Modbus protocol has 4 different registers. These are named coil, discrete input, input register, and holding register. These registers can contain different types of data. The coil and the discrete input registers are Boolean values only. So the values you store here can be either true or false, or 1 or 0. While the input registers and the holding registers can contain ordinary numbers. So here you see an overview of these 4 different registers: coils, discrete input, input register, and the holding register. So coils are bit or Boolean, and from the client you can both read and write data to the coil register. While for the discrete input, which is also a bit or Boolean, here you can only read data from this register from the client. In the input register, here you can store unsigned word. An unsigned word is a 16-bit non-negative integer values between 0 and 65,535. Typically, if you want to store decimal values, you typically need to use two of those registers. The input register, here the client can only read data from the server, while for the holding register, the client can both read and write data. Next, I will introduce the Modbus Demo software. So the Modbus Demo software consists of a Modbus Demo server and a Modbus Demo client. And this Modbus demo software is created with the LabVIEW programming environment. And the Modbus demo software supports all 4 Modbus registers, namely coils, discrete input, input register, and holding register. And the source code is also available, and you can download it from my web page. Just click on this link, which is the address to my web page, which you see here. Then you can find it either here in the menu. Go to this option, select Modbus, and then you go to the Modbus page on my web page, and then you find information about Modbus. And here you can download the Modbus demo software. You can watch videos for details, etc. So just click on one of these links in order to download and use the Modbus demo software. So here you see an overview of the Modbus demo software. It consists of a Modbus server, and here you see the different registers for coils, discrete input, input register, and holding register. And here you can start and stop the server, and then you can click here in order to change the values on the server, and the same for the client. You can start and stop the server. You just first need to enter the address for the server. In this example, in this tutorial, the server and the clients will be on the same computer, so then I just use localhost, but typically you'll use the IP address. And then you can, when you have started the server, you can select the different Modbus registers and see the values, or write these values to the server. So when you have downloaded and installed the Modbus demo software, the Modbus demo server and the Modbus demo client is available as so-called executable applications. So I just double click them on my desktop here in order to start them. So here I have the Modbus demo server, and then I double click in order to open the Modbus demo client. So then I can start by starting the server, and then you see here you have the coil registers, the discrete input registers, and the holding registers, which is the actual data stored on the Modbus server. And then I have the Modbus client. Here I will just specify localhost, since the server and the client is on the same computer. So now I start the client, and then here on the server I can click here in order to change the values from false to true. And then you see the values are red here on the client, but I can also do the opposite. I can change the values from the client, and the values on the server are updated. So that's for coils. I can do the same for discrete input. Discrete input on the client is read-only, so I cannot change the values here, but I can change the value on the server, and then you see the values are updated or sent to the client. Let's go to the input register, which are numbers. So then I can write a number here, 12, and then you see it's updated on the client. And also this one is read-only, so I cannot change the values here on the client, but I can change it on the server, and the clients read and updates the values, or sending the value to the client and present them in the user interface. I can also use decimal numbers, 12.45 or something, and then you see the values are sent to the client as well. But for decimal numbers, you need to store the values in two registers like this. So these two values together are this decimal number. So these the registers here are unsigned word, which is a 16-bit integer value, while this is a 32-bit floating point value. You can also have negative values like this, and these values are then stored in these two registers. The same for the holding register. But for the holding register, you can also change the values here on the client like this, and then you see it's updates on the server as well. So basically that's the Modbus demo software, consisting of a Modbus demo server and a Modbus demo client, which we will use later when creating the MATLAB applications. Next, I will show how you can use Modbus with the MATLAB programming environment. So in order to use Modbus with MATLAB, of course, you can create code from scratch communicating with the Modbus protocol, but it's easier to use the Industrial Communication Toolbox, which is part of MATLAB. And the Industrial Communication Toolbox supports OPC, both OPC DA and OPC UA. This was previously part of the OPC Toolbox, but it's now part of the Industrial Communication Toolbox. This toolbox also supports MQTT and Modbus, which we'll use in this tutorial. So note this is a new toolbox in MATLAB, and it was included in the MATLAB version 2022A. So in order to use this toolbox, you need to have this software or newer version of MATLAB. Then let's see how we can use this Industrial Communication Toolbox for communicating with the Modbus. Basically, the Industrial Communication Toolbox, you can use it to communicate with the Modbus servers, such as PLCs. If you have a Modbus on a PC, etc., we will use this Modbus demo software in order to so we will create scripts in MATLAB and then communicate with the Modbus demo server, which I had previously shown and demonstrated. And this Modbus in Industrial Communication Toolbox supports both TCP, IP, and serial RTU. And you can also use this Modbus Explorer application, which is a graphical user interface in order to communicate with a Modbus server. But let's start to see how we can use use Modbus in ordinary MATLAB code. So this Industrial Communication Toolbox supports different functions for communicating with Modbus. The three main functions are Modbus. You use this function in order to establish a connection to the Modbus server, and then you have functions for reading and writing data. So these are the three main functions that you need to use in order to create a MATLAB script that are communicating with a Modbus server. So here you see a basic example where this where you establish a connection to the server. So then you specify Modbus type. I will use Modbus TCP IP. Then you specify the Modbus server. Since in this tutorial the server and the clients will be on the same computer, I just specify localhost, or typically here you will need to specify the IP address. And then the Modbus port, the default Modbus port is 502, and then you just use the Modbus function and then specify the Modbus type, the Modbus server, and the Modbus port. And then an object will be established in MATLAB, which you can use in order to either write or read data to this specific Modbus server. So then you use either the read function or the write function. Let's start with the read function. So then you just specify the Modbus type, the Modbus server, and the Modbus port, and then establish connection to the server. Then you need to specify what kind of register that you are going to use. In this example, we will use the coils, the start address, and number of registers that you are going to read. So then you just can store the data from the server in a variable. I just call it data, and then equal to read the Modbus object, which is created here, the register type, which is specified here, coils, the starting address, which is specified here, and number of registers that you are going to read. So let's go to MATLAB and see how we can implement this example and test it with the Modbus demo server. So now I open the MATLAB programming environment, which you see here. We have the command window, and then we have the script here. So then I just type or select new script in order to open an empty script in the script editor, which you see here. And I will just copy some example code as a starting point, which you see here. So then this is the example I just shown you. So then we use this Modbus function in order to establish a connection to the Modbus server, and then we use this code in order to read data from the Modbus server. So here I specified TCP IP, localhost, and the Modbus port 502. Then I establish connection to the server. I specify the register type, start address, and number of registers to read. Then I just save this somewhere on my hard drive. I can just call it Modbus example, Modbus read or something, because this example are going to read values from the Modbus server. Click save. Then I need to start my Modbus demo server, which I have here. So then I just start the server. Since I'm going to read the coil register, and I'm going to read 10 registers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then I just set some values here like this, and then I run my MATLAB script, and then you see the data are now stored in this local variable here called data. So then you see it reads the same data that are actually stored on the server. So then this is 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, and finally 0. Then I can just change some values here. I change all to true like this, run the script once more, and it takes some time to execute it, and then you see all the values are now true or 1, which is the same values that are stored on the server. So basically this is how you create a basic MATLAB script in order to read data from a Modbus server. Of course you can improve this script with using a for loop, while loop, etc., and then read continuously values from the server. You can read the data into some arrays, etc., and plot the values, etc. So basically this is just a starting point for creating your own Modbus applications using the this MATLAB environment and this Industrial Communication Toolbox in MATLAB like this. So next, let's see how we can write data to this Modbus server. So now just copy some code I have already made here. So basically this is almost identical as the script that are reading data. So the only change here, so this is the same, where I establish a connection to the server. I specify the register type, the starting address. Here I specify which values I'm going to write to the server. So in this example I'm going to write 4 values to the server, which should be 1, 1, 0, and 1. And then I use the write function, where I specify this establishing this this M, which is the Modbus connection. So M is this is an object that are holding information about the connection to the Modbus server, and then I specify register type, starting address, and finally the values. So let's just make sure that the server is running. Now I just changed all the values to false like this, and then I just run this script. I just need to save it. I can save it to my hard drive as Modbus write like this, and then you see it should write 1, 1, 0, 1, and then you see 1, 1, 0, 1. I can also write more values like this. Let's so here I can see 10 different values. So then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 values like this. Then I click run in order to write these values, and then you see the same values are now stored on the server. So this is 1, 1, 0, and 4 ones, 2 zeros, and 1 1 at the end here. And I'll go back to the Modbus read. I'll also use MATLAB in order to read these values, and then you see the same values are read here from the Modbus server. So basically, this is how you read data to a Modbus server, which I have here. And here you see a basic example how you can write values to this Modbus server. Next, I will demonstrate the built-in Modbus Explorer application that is part of this Industrial Communication Toolbox in MATLAB. So here you see the Modbus Explorer application, which is consisting of this graphical user interface. So the first page you see is the connection page. So then you select either configure Modbus serial or configure Modbus TCP IP. Then you just click one of those and are configuring the connection to the server, and then you will get into this user interface where you can see and read values from the server. So I will demonstrate a basic example where I'm using the Modbus demo server, and then I will use this Modbus Explorer application in order to connect to this server and read and write values from the server. So let's see how we can use this Modbus Explorer application. You find it here under application or apps. And then you can just search for it. Just search or type Modbus, and then this Modbus Explorer will be shown. And just select it, and it will pop up like this. And then I have my Modbus demo server here. I just make sure to start it. And then I click on configure Modbus TCP IP. Then I need to specify the server address. Since the server is on the same computer, I just specify localhost. The port, the default port is 502. Here on the Modbus demo server I can select or change the port here, but I just prefer to use the default port. Then I select the register types I want to use, either coil, input, holding register, or input register. I choose coil. And the starting register address here, so I just type 1. And then I change this one to 1, and then I just click here on read in order to see if I'm able to read the values from the server. And then you see I was able to read 1. I can change it back to false, and then it's changed to 0. So now we know that the parameters and the settings here are correct, and we are able to read values from the server. Then I can just click here, confirm parameters, and then a permanent connection to the server is established. And then here in the list we can see values. We can write values to the server, and we can also see a plot of the values. So then I can just change the values here to 1, and then you see this value is changing to 1, and you see also the plot is changing to 1. I can turn it off, and then you see it's changing to 0, and the plot is also going to 0. Change it back to true, and then you see it reacts on the values from the server. I can also write values here. So the address I specify 1, the coil, and then you see here, since this is a Modbus client, we can only write values to the coil register or to the holding register. Then I can write 0, click write, and then you see this value was changing to 0. I can change it back to 1, and then it changes here and also here on the server. I can also add more registers here by clicking insert. So then I can select the register type here, either coil, holding register, input register, etc. So then let's choose the holding register. Starting value is could be 2 then. Then I go to the holding register here on the demo server. I can change something to 12 here, 14, 16, and then I can just click here, resume reads, and then you see the values here are read. So now it reads address number 2, which is, so this is address 1, 2, 3, etc. So you see it's reading 14. I can change it to 18, and you see 18 is reading here, and also see the plot are updated. I can change to address 1. Okay, it has to be a unique value. I can change it to 4 then. So then it's 1, 2, 3, 4. This could be 35. And then you see the value here are read from the server. So basically this is how you use the Modbus Explorer application. So by using this application you can easily read and write values from any Modbus server without writing any MATLAB code. Next I will demonstrate some more MATLAB examples where I'm using the different Modbus registers. So we have 4 different Modbus registers: the coils, which I have used so far, we have the discrete input register, we have the input registers, and the holding registers. So these 4 registers can contain, so the coils and the discrete input have can hold discrete values, Boolean values, either 1 or 0, true or false. And for the coils, you can for the client you can both read and write values, while for the discrete input you can only read values from the client. And for the input registers and the holding registers, here you can read or save or write unsigned words, which is a 16-bit integer value. For the input register you can only read values, while for the holding register you can both read and write values. So let's go back to the coils registers shown earlier. So we have written 2 MATLAB scripts in MATLAB, one for writing data to the server and one for reading data to the server. And for the coils you can both read and write data from a Modbus client like this. And then here you see the example we just created. So we need to create a Modbus object in order to start the communication with the server, and then we use the write function in order to write data to the server, and then we use the read function in order to read values from the server. And then we need to specify the register type, in this case coils. So let's see how we can use the other registers as well. We start with the discrete input registers. So for the discrete input registers, from the client we can only read data, so then we don't need to have a client that are writing data to the server, because that is not allowed, because you can only read data from a discrete input register in Modbus. And here you see the MATLAB code for reading values from the discrete input register. Basically it's the same example as previously. The only thing you need to change is the register type, which is of type no inputs. Let's go back to MATLAB and see how this is working. So we are back in MATLAB. We have our Modbus server, which is here. It is started, and you can change the values here on the server. And then here in the MATLAB we have these previous scripts for reading data from the coils register. So then we just change it to the input register, then just specify inputs as a register type, and the rest of the code is the same. Then we go to the discrete input here, and since the input registers these discrete input registers can only be read from the client. So we need to change some values here on the server like this, and then we just run this script in the MATLAB environment, and then you see the data now is 1 1, which is correct, 0 1, and this one is also 1. So we are able to with this simple script able to read data from the input registers. Next we will use the input registers. So basically so now we will show example using the input registers, and for these registers you can store so-called unsigned word, which is 16-bit integer values, and also this register is read-only from the client. So then we have the Modbus server here, and then we have the MATLAB script for reading data from these input registers that are storing so-called unsigned word, which is a 16-bit integer values. So let's see how we can create this example in MATLAB. So then we're back in MATLAB. We have the server here, so then go to the input registers, and then we just type some values. Like this, and we go to the MATLAB program. So this then we just need to change the register type, so to input to the input registers like this. So this is the word we need to use, input regs, and the rest of the code is equal. So then we just click run in order to read data from the input registers. So then you see we are able to read the data that are stored on the server: 12, 34, 45, 67, etc. And then we can change the starting address, number of registers that we are going to read, etc. So basically this is how you use the input registers in MATLAB. Finally, we show how you can use the holding register. So since the holding register can store data of unsigned word, which is 16-bit integer values, and the client can both read and write values, we can have two different clients, one for writing data to the Modbus server and another script that are reading data from the server. So then we are back in MATLAB examples here. We can start with the Modbus write. So then they change the register type to holding regs, which is the word you need to use. This is for writing data, and the same for reading data. So let's start with writing data, and then I go to the Modbus server, to the holding register here, and then you have some values here. I can write 34, 78, 88, 99, 34, etc. And then I use the same write function. I just run the code, and then you see 34 has been written, 78 has been written, 88 has been written, 99, 34, etc. So basically this is how you write values to this holding register. So let's see if you are able to read the same values here in MATLAB as well. So then we are able to read the same values: 34, 78, 88, 99, 34, etc. So basically this is how you use the holding register, and since the holding register you can just both write data and read data from a Modbus client like this. So far we have shown how we can use MATLAB in order to communicate with the Modbus server. We was able to read and write data from different registers. We have the Coils registers, we have the discrete input registers, we have the input registers and the holding registers in Modbus. So far we was able to read and write binary values using the coils and the discrete input registers, and we was able to write and read numbers, integer values, using the input registers and the holding registers. And how can we use these registers to read or write decimal values. Basically, so typically in Modbus we need to use two registers in order to be able to store a decimal value, because this the input registers and the holding registers are unsigned 16-bit words values. We need to use two of those registers in order to store one decimal value. So here you see an example where we can use this feature in MATLAB. So here you see a basic example where we can write decimal values to the holding registers from MATLAB code. So basically we just specify the values we are going to write. Here is a decimal number, 19.2, 21.7, 22.4, etc. And then the write function is the same, but in addition we just need to add this data type here as a new input argument. So then we specify single in order to be able to write these decimal values to the Modbus server. So let's go back to MATLAB and see how we can do this in the MATLAB example. So now we are back in the MATLAB environment. So the only thing we need to change here is the values. Here we are in the Modbus write script. So then we just want to write some decimal values: 34.5, 78.9, 88.1, 99.5, 34.12 or something. And then we use the same write function, but we need to add a new input argument here. And then we just specify single, because single is a 32-bit decimal value. Then I can just click here on the run button. And then here on the Modbus server, you see we was able to store these decimal values: 34.5, 78.9, 88.1 and 99.5, etc. And as you see, each of these values are now stored in two holding registers like this. So these two holding registers are this value, these two registers are this value, and these two registers are this value, and these two registers are this value, etc. Same for the Modbus read. So that you just need to specify this new input argument. Just specify single, which is single is a 32-bit decimal value. Then I just click run in order to read these values, and then you see the values has been stored here. I'll just make it a little bit bigger so you can see. So now I'm reading 10 values, but here he was only writing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So then you see this is the first value, second, third, 4 and 5, and the rest of them is just 0. So now we are able to write and read decimals values from the Modbus server using ordinary MATLAB script. So basically that's all. So good luck with Modbus and your MATLAB scripts. Thank you and goodbye.